Hello everyone, welcome back. It's Z Power Hour here with another episode of Competitive Loring. I've just returned from a free win-a-box event being held at Top Table Games in Avon Lake, Ohio, where I ended up finishing first place. We had 16 players and ended up playing 4 rounds of Swiss, and I ended up finishing undefeated and winning the event. I chose to play Amber Steel Aggro for the event. It feels fairly strong, and after viewing a little bit of the Lorcana Continental event, I kind of influenced some of my selections for cards in this deck. Let's start with our characters. The first thing we have is Cinderella Ballroom Sensation. By far one of the best cards in Amber that you can be playing. The fact that it sings a 3-cost song on turn 2 is absurd. Let the Storm Rage on, Strength of a Raging Fire. I mean, if there's better songs on 2, you tell me. I know when I played Hyper Aggro in the last format, if I saw this on 1, I knew it was going to be a long game. Next we have Daisy Duck. This card is very good. Obviously, I've used it in Hyper Aggro a lot. However, surprisingly, in this deck, you don't use it so much to get ahead. You utilize it as a way to end the game. So in the situations where, say, you're playing another steel matchup, they have a hard time dealing with 4 toughness. So if you end up drawing 1 or 2 of these later in the game, they can close out the game very quickly for you. Then we have Simba Future King. After watching Frank Karsten show off the power of the larger Simba, kind of steered me into including the package in my deck as well. This overperformed today. Having the ability to have additional card selection in the deck proved to be detrimental. I would have probably lost several games if I didn't have the ability to help filter through my draws with this card. Next we have Lilo Escape Artist. This is fairly strong against Be Prepareds. That's fairly strong against any deck that's trying to 1-for-1 you regularly. And then sometimes, as we've seen Frank do, and I got to experience today, you can do these little cheeky things with the Simba package after you recur them to ready them up, and now you've got 1 or 2 of these sitting there ready to go for the next turn. Your opponent has no way to answer them. 2 Piglet Pooh Pirate Captain. It's hard for me to not play this if I'm playing Amber. The card questing for 3 that costs 2 is just above rate 99.9% of the time. Sure, there's going to be times where it doesn't do exactly what you want it to do because it's going to be a 1 body, but you have enough cheap threats that you can utilize this in most cases. We have 1 copy of Simba Protective Cub. This kind of leans itself back to the cheeky things you can do with the Simba lines. Having the ability to put this in bodyguarded and then shift is pretty absurd in order to get the value off of Simba right away if you can't use a 1-drop you played earlier in the game. 4 copies of Doc Bold Knight. This is one of the best card advantage engines you can have if you don't want to play a whole new world. Then you play Doc or Rapunzel, right? For Smee Bumbling Mate, one of the best 2-drop questers you can have. There's actually a lot of little synergy in the deck to prevent Smee from taking damage, whether it's Piglet or a couple other cards that we'll see later in the deck. One such instance is John Silver Ship's Cook. This card overperformed my expectations when I tested it, so I decided to include a second copy of it for the event today, and it allowed me to prevent a lot of 2-for-1s against Amethyst cards like Snake and Fox. Or, if an opponent did get me with a Fox 1 turn, then I had the ability to prevent it from challenging again the next turn, and now, they don't have a song to sing. It's kind of a useless 1 quester, and then I can utilize the rest of my deck from there to get ahead. Next we have 4 copies of Lawrence. Being a 4/4 is just awesome, amazing. I mean, sure, if you're playing it's a steel matchup, this is likely to be worse for wear than some of the other 3 drops you could possibly be playing. But also, if you're playing steel, you have Rapunzel to utilize too. So it kind of goes hand in hand with wanting to draw as many cards as possible and deal efficiently with your opponent's threats and quests very well. 3 copies of Pete, Games Referee. It's just really good at going, hey, no actions. Now you can't blow me out like you were expecting. Or, hey, no, be prepared, I win the game. Or, hey, no friends on the other side this turn. So now you're playing off of whatever you have in your hand. Or just, there's countless things it could be, even removal spells or anything of that nature. For Rapunzel, essentially the best card draw engine you could have for the deck. There's been plenty of times in testing and even today at the event where it was, hey, I'm going to play a Lawrence. You're going to challenge into it. It's going to be a 0-4 and it's going to turn back into a 4-4. Or, oh, you put some damage. I got some damage counters on my Smee. Well, let me draw 2 cards from my Rapunzel. Next we have Sven Reindeer Steed. This card I had kind of looked at with some pet decks in the past, as well as in Hyper Aggro. This is probably one of the best shells for it, simply for the fact that you can protect your recurred Lilos as well. I know it sounds kind of silly, but as the game progresses and you get later in the game, when you can go, okay, pay 2, draw, play a Sven, untap the Lilo, and have 4 lore staring your opponent in the face, a lot of times that's enough to finish the game. Pluto Guard Dog. This was an amazing bodyguard. Most of the time this is like a 1.5 for 1. You get 1 card for sure out of the way. A lot of times my opponents in the Amethyst matchups had to use like a Broom or a Chernobog in order to deal damage, so that way they didn't lose like an Elsa or something of that nature when they challenged into it as well. Or like a Genie, and then they were short another card. So the fact that this is removing card advantage from your opponent because they're forcing themselves to challenge with a 1-drop in a lot of cases, greatly outperformed my expectations. Rapunzel, once again, is very good with this card because sometimes you get it back up to being a 5-5 and your opponent just kind of sits there and looks at you, doesn't know what to do. Finally, to finish out the Simba package, we have Simba Pride Protector. This is very strong with anything that sings, anything that's questing and is a little weak. Just anytime you're turning characters sideways, and this gets to be a character that's sideways, it is very good. Once again, mentioned it earlier, you have the cheeky little bodyguard shift line interaction that you can do. Can be absurd. I did get to do it once. Wasn't for maximum value like you've seen Frank do, but it was very, very strong. And then finally, I have a couple copies of Gantu Captain Cranky Head. This card may not be what you want to be playing in the deck realistically long term. However, one thing you might have noticed as we went through the deck is I really went out of my way to make Brawl look as bad as possible. I know that seems kind of silly, but I think this deck needs to be able to beat RP fairly consistently, as well as being able to beat red-blue now. I don't anticipate red-blue being very prevalent in the format currently, just because it usually takes a couple weeks for it to have its lists a little bit more developed in the metagame. But this definitely brought me back in a game where I was behind today and just won. Okay, I have Quest for 4 twice, half the game essentially. Then we have 4 copies of Let the Storm Rage On. This is one of the best songs, if not the best song, for Cinderella Ballroom Sensation. Essentially says, whatever you play on 1 doesn't matter. That's at least my experience for playing Hyper Aggro in the last format. But, yeah, the fact that it replaces itself too after it's sung, very, very strong. 4 copies of Strength of a Raging Fire. There are times where you just get real dedicated to the board, and then Cinderella says, I'm going to kill anything you put down. This card is inherently one of the cards that I usually keep in an opening hand versus Let the Storm Rage on, even though this would be better in a lot of cases. Having an Inkable Song that can also do essentially the same thing, especially if you find out you're playing against Emerald in a game 1, is very, very strong. And then finally, I did play one copy of And Then Along Came Zeus. This was a concession for if I ran into other Plutos, that this would be a good answer. It turned out that it did answer Genies fairly well as well. Not that it necessarily needs to be targeted at Genies a lot of times, but in some situations today that I ran into, it was a good Genie answer. If you anticipate playing into a lot of Pluto guard dogs in your meta, wherever you happen to be, I would suggest probably bumping up to 2 copies of this card. A few things additionally to go over. You can protect your Smee with your Gantus and your John Silvers and your Piglets. Having 6 characters that protect your Smee is fairly strong. It may be incorrect, the 6 characters, as they are currently balanced now. However, it is very good. I've heard some people talking about Mines, or Brennan DeCandio in particular has been playing Mines in his Amber Steel list. It is a very good card. I couldn't convince myself to play it in this list because I wanted to focus on the Simba shift line availability, which is also why you see me playing a greater quantity of Lilos versus Piglets. Having the capability to protect those a little bit better while also protecting everything else is just very strong. Also, matchups today were a little bit different. I played against Green Purple twice, which I feel like is a very strong matchup for the deck. The people that I had conversations with thought that they had a fairly good advantage. However, I won fairly confidently today. Not to say that this deck should always beat Green Purple, but I think that it's on the positive side of the spectrum for the matchup. Anytime that you have a Cinderella into the store or into the strength to be able to answer like a Bonsai. Sometimes you can answer a Curse Merfolk if you really have to. It's not suggested. But there's a lot of things that you can do when you have a Cinderella on board against that matchup. I played against a blue-purple deck today. It was the only deck that took me to 3 games in our best-of-3 format. I think there was probably a world where I could win the game 2 if I play around my opponent having a second copy of Elsa. So Elsa on 5, Elsa on 6. However, I did not play around that and I got punished and went to a game 3. I also believe this version is fairly strong into RP, being that we make Brawl weaker. A lot of times your opponent really, if you put a Cinderella Ballroom Sensation and a Simba side by side on a board against RP, they are normally not going to brawl your Simba. It is very rare that they brawl your Simba, allowing you to utilize the shift line, which also protects a lot of your other characters. Once again, the recursion with the Lilo being at a higher quantity than the Piglet into that matchup is very strong and to be prepared. And then you also have the excuse me. You also have the Pluto that trades with a Maui. You have the Sven to help dodge a fox, John Silver to help only allow a fox to go for 1 card in 1 turn and allow you to maintain tempo. Just there's a lot of advantageous cards in this list against that matchup. That's everything I have for you guys today. Once again, thank you for stopping by. If you can, leave a like, comment, subscribe, and we'll get back to you again next time. Peace.